Now, I would like to commence the audience. To officially commence today's proceedings, it is my distinct honor to welcome esteemed dignitaries gracing our virtual days today. We are also deeply privileged to have our keynote speaker, Professor Kshema Jones, English and Foreign Languages, University of Hyderabad, joining us today. We eagerly await your perspective on the future of English studies. To deliver the keynote address, I would like to introduce Kshema Jones. Dr. Kshema Jones is an associate professor and head of the Department of Training and Development at EFL University, Hyderabad. As a teacher educator, language teacher, and researcher, her work focuses on the intersection of digital technologies and English language pedagogy. She specializes in multiliteracies, hypertext reading, and integrating AI and Web 2.0 tools into ESL classroom. Her language instruction emphasizes the development of students' English proficiency through multimodal academic writing and contemporary presentation skills. At the university, she teaches specialized courses including blended learning, designing flipped classrooms, evaluating online language learning, and using AI in ESL classrooms. She designs and conducts short-term professional development programs, workshops, and courses for ESL teachers and teacher educators. She has authored, co-authored, and edited English coursebook for students from the primary to postgraduate levels and has developed training modules for educators. She also serves on the boards of various national universities, contributes to international journals, such as editing for the journal Languaging, and consults for EdTech and educational organizations. Please, ma'am, the virtual floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Sinha. I would like to share my screen. Here we go. Dr. Sinha, is this visible and am I audible?
Yes, ma'am. It is visible and you are perfectly audible.
Thank you. Thank you again for that introduction, Dr. Sinha. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone joining from around the world. Wherever you are, thank you for taking the time to be here. It's a pleasure and a privilege to have this opportunity to reflect with you on one of the most significant questions facing education today. How are knowledge, learning, and teaching changing in the age of artificial intelligence? Before I start, I would like to thank Professor Sanjoy Kumar, the Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor Sanjay Kumar, Principal of the College, Professor Pandey, the Convenor, Professor Roy, the Secretary of WAAR, and Dr. Manish Kumar, the person that I have been in touch with, the Organizing Secretary. Thank you for this opportunity. Over the last few years, conversations about artificial intelligence have become almost impossible to avoid in education. Wherever we go, conferences, universities, schools, teacher training programs, the conversation most of the time begins with AI. Like the Honorable Vice Chancellor said just now during the inauguration, there are challenges that we seek to address. And again, Sir proposed that human is one element as a solution. He proposed human as a solution. This is more or less the whole idea of my keynote as well. Just a second, I'm trying to move my slide. In my own teacher training workshops, when I conduct short-term teacher training workshops for teachers, the first questions are almost always the same. It is interesting that the conversation with teachers almost always begins with tools. Which AI tool should I use? This is a concern that most teachers pose. Which platform is best? Which prompt works best? How do we write better prompts? How do I detect AI generated writing? These are things that teachers are interested in knowing. We are interested in knowing what AI can do, which tools are available, or how accurate particular systems are. These are important questions. I'm not saying they are not important, but I don't think they are the most important educational questions. And what I would like to think about today is, I would like to ask you all to think about today is, we often hear people say that AI is the answer to a lot of problems. So if AI is the answer, I would like us to ask ourselves, what exactly is the question? Is the question how to use ChatGPT in the classroom? Is the question how to generate images using Cloud or Gemini? Is it how to assess AI generated assignments? Or is the deeper question this? Is the deeper question, what does it mean to teach students when a machine can explain almost anything to them? What does it mean to learn when information is everywhere and instantly accessible? And what does it mean to know, to truly know something, when an algorithm can generate knowledge on demand, give explanations, arguments, present summaries, extensions, and so on? I would like to suggest that the more fundamental issue is that AI is changing the conditions under which teaching, learning, and knowledge production takes place. Teachers need to ask different questions. What should my students be learning? How do I know whether they are learning? What kind of activities should I design for learning? And how should I assess this kind of work? So this is what I would like us to explore today. Today, I would like us to explore 4 propositions. Firstly, that AI is changing the nature of knowledge. Second, AI is changing the nature of learning. Third, AI is changing the nature of teaching. And finally, that AI is changing the nature of academic disciplines and educational institutions. My argument is simple. Tools will continue to change. Today's most popular AI application may be obsolete from a year from now. And if we focus only on technologies and tools, we risk missing the much larger transformation that is taking place. In other words, the real challenges, I feel, are not technological, they are pedagogical. And ultimately, the solution that I would like to suggest is profoundly human. Let's start with the first proposition, that AI is changing the nature of knowledge. To understand how AI is changing knowledge, I think we need to go back in history to ask a more fundamental question. How has knowledge changed throughout human history? You will notice that it is not just now in the 21st century that knowledge is changing. It's happened across centuries, across human history. One of the primary purposes of education has always been to provide access to knowledge. This is what we do as teachers. We provide our students access to knowledge. Every educational system, regardless of culture, period, or government, has always grappled with these questions. How do we teach? How do our students learn? And what does it mean to know? And these are what are changing now. So to understand this, I would like us to take a step back and take a look at the longer history of knowledge, the evolution of knowledge. As you can see, in early societies, knowledge resided in people. It was our elders who transmitted knowledge to us. It was priests, it was scholars, it was storytellers. They were living repositories of collective memory. And how did knowledge travel? It could travel only as fast as people could walk or speak. Yeah? And its preservation depended largely on human memory. Education therefore focused on memorization, repetition, rote learning, and apprenticeship. The invention of writing fundamentally altered this relationship. Knowledge could now exist independently outside human memory. So we are now no longer depending on memory, but it started residing outside memory. Knowledge could survive across generations and travel beyond the lifetime and walking ability of its creator. So it's not just the walking speed or the talking speed that determined knowledge transmission, because books were more permanent. Books could also be carried to other countries across the seas and so on. Monasteries, libraries, and universities emerged as institutions responsible for preserving this. But across centuries, further centuries down, we have the printing press. That was the next biggest revolution. This marked another profound transformation. Books became more affordable. It was not just books did not belong just to the elite or the royal class. Knowledge was no longer the privilege of a small scholarly group. Ideas traveled further, literacy expanded, and scientific discovery spread more rapidly. And as you can, yeah, so this particular slide is to tell you how, this kind of writing, the slab or writing on a stone clay tablet or stone slab, different from how knowledge transmitted at that time is different from how knowledge was transmitted when we have manuscripts to how knowledge transmitted when we have printing press, and then take a look at what we have now. Yeah. So centuries later, I'm talking about the last part of it here. Centuries later, when the internet came in, it also transformed knowledge production a great deal. Suddenly, access to information was no longer limited by geography or physical availability of books. We didn't really need to have books in our hands. Information became instantaneously available anytime, anywhere, and it was searchable, quickly searchable, and also shareable. So obviously that changes how knowledge is transmitted. Information could now be created, shared, updated, and discussed almost instantaneously by people across the world. Now, I would like us to consider two variables that seem to have shaped every major leap in human development. Sociologists and people who research always talk about how information and communication are two variables that determine the development of a society. The amount of available information for a society, the amount of information that's available for a society, and the speed with which it can be communicated. These are two things that have always shaped the trajectory of human civilization. So the history of civilization is in many ways the history of expanding access to knowledge and hastening or accelerating its communication. So these two variables have consistently determined development. They are indicators of development. So as access to knowledge expand, so too does the number of people who can contribute to it. This is something that we need to remember. The more the access to knowledge, the more the number of people who are accessing it and contributing, gaining from it and also contributing to it. So look at how knowledge production expands when you are providing more access to knowledge. Every generation can build on the previous generation's knowledge and so on. And secondly, the speed of communicating. So the communication of scientific discoveries, how fast can you communicate that with the rest of the world? That also decides the amount of knowledge that is produced. Now, every major educational technology has transformed one or both of these variables, these forces, the amount of knowledge available and the speed with which it can be communicated. Today, however, we are witnessing a fundamentally different kind of transformation. While previous technologies like the books and the printing press and the internet or the computers primarily helped humans preserve, store, reproduce, and communicate knowledge, like writing reduced our dependence on memory and so on. While these technologies helped with preserving and storing and reproducing knowledge, artificial intelligence goes one step further. It doesn't merely help us access knowledge more efficiently or communicate it more rapidly. It increasingly participates in the process through which knowledge itself is produced. Now, this is what we should be paying attention to, because AI explains concepts, AI summarizes research, it compares ideas, it analyzes information. It can translate across languages. In other words, AI is no longer simply a repository of information or a channel of communication. It has become an active participant in knowledge work. I realized this during one of my earliest interactions with ChatGPT. Like many educators, I approached it with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. I asked it to explain a concept that I regularly teach, and I actually thought it was my own interpretation because I was linking a construct, a theoretical construct, with something that I had come up with. So I thought it was my idea. I thought it was my discovery. So when ChatGPT gave me the explanation was not perfect. There were lots of things that I disagreed with, but that's not what surprised me. What surprised me was that the fact that there was an explanation at all, that ChatGPT could explain something that I thought was very closely mine. Yeah. So now we are at this place where a student sitting alone at home can now ask a question, receive an explanation, ask a follow-up question, request another example, challenge the answer, and continue the conversation, all without waiting for a teacher, a textbook, or a tutorial session. This we see in many of our own classes, has happened with me too. Someone raised their hand to ask a question. I thought I will just complete the sentence I was in the midst of, and then ask that person. So I completed the sentence, turned to the student and asked them what their question was. By then they had already checked with ChatGPT and said, no, ma'am, sorted. Yeah. So for the first time in the history of the world, learners are interacting not only with stored knowledge, but with a system that can actively participate in explaining, refining, and extending their knowledge through dialogue. And this, I believe, is the real educational significance of artificial intelligence. It is changing not merely our access to knowledge, but the very nature of knowledge work itself. Recent studies, there are lots of research articles you could read upon this, that talk about researchers, teachers, students, writers, and professionals increasingly using generative AI, not just for searching information. It's not like a search.
Social spheres.
Okay. So it's not just to retrieve information like we use Google or other search engines, but we are using generative AI like ChatGPT to think with it, to brainstorm ideas, to generate explanations, summarize readings, synthesize findings, draft reports of our answers and our essays, identify patterns, and even receive feedback. We are also trying to get feedback from generative AI. What's interesting here is not simply the frequency of use, but the nature of the tasks being delegated. Take a look at the activities that we do with ChatGPT or Gemini or Claude. These are activities that we traditionally associated with thinking and knowledge construction. Whether AI performs them well or poorly is another question. But the important point is that students are beginning to treat AI as a cognitive partner. It's like an extension of their brain rather than an information source. And this represents a significant shift. And that brings us to the second proposition, that AI is changing the nature of learning. Obviously, if knowledge is changing, then it follows that it has to also change the nature of learning. This definitely makes us anxious as teachers. But this is not the first time education has faced such a moment. Throughout history, every major educational technology has been greeted with anxiety. Yeah, take a look at 2,000 years ago. 2,000 years ago, more than 2,000 years ago, Socrates questioned the value of writing. Remember, at that time, we were transmitting information orally. Teachers were oral deliverers of information. So when writing came in, and not really books the way we know them, but when writing started, Socrates started questioning the value of writing. He worried that once people started writing things down, students will rely less on memory and will fail to genuinely understand things. So he has said, or it is attributed to him, that writing or books will make people lazy. That was the anxiety first, that when books or writing come in, it's going to make our students lazy. Centuries later, when books became widely available, to printing press and all, similar concerns emerged. If students could simply look up things in a book and read a book to understand information, to get information, would they stop memorizing? That was a concern. Would easy access to information make learning superficial? That was the second concern. The same debate started with calculators. Yeah, resurfaced when calculators were introduced. We had the same problem. Teachers protested. There was anxiety. Many schools restricted or even banned them. Remember what we are doing with mobile phones now. Yeah, so many schools restricted and even banned calculators. Teachers worried that students would never learn mathematics if a machine performed every calculation for them. The concern was understandable. If a machine can do calculations instantly, what would happen to mathematical thinking? Yeah. Now, similarly, there were concerns. Something similar like this happened with spell checkers. When spell checkers, when MS Office, when Word introduced spell checkers, people started saying, English teachers started saying that, oh my God, now our students are not going to learn spelling anymore. When search engines came, there was a similar concern. When online encyclopedias came, we had a similar concern. But what we have to remember is none of these technologies actually destroyed learning. Instead, they just transformed learning. This is what we are trying to do now too. Every technology automated certain tasks, and that forced us as educators to reconsider which human capabilities are important now, which human capabilities remain important now. When technology can automate so many of these thinking processes, what still remain? This is what we have to be looking at as teachers. So AI represents the latest stage in this pattern, but with one important difference. Unlike books that stored knowledge, calculators which automated computation, or search engines that helped us retrieve information, AI increasingly assists with activities that education has traditionally associated with thinking itself. So AI is not just playing around with knowledge and its availability, it's actually helping us with thinking. It's explaining, it's generating ideas, it is analyzing evidence, it's providing feedback, yeah? It's engaging in dialogue. This is what we have to be thinking about. So AI now does not just automate routine work like a calculator does. Yeah, it's not just routine work that it does. It is increasingly automating intellectual and creative work. The challenge for educators then is no longer deciding, should my students use AI? That is no longer the question. Yes, that question has already been answered. The students will definitely use AI. They are already using it. They will use AI. So now we need to ask better questions. We need to ask, how can I make my students ask better questions, evaluate competing claims? How can I help them recognize bias? How can I help them synthesize ideas from multiple sources? And if AI synthesizes it, will they be able to check the veracity, the validity of the summary and so on? And perhaps most importantly, we need to help our students know when artificial intelligence is helping us think and when it is thinking for us. Is AI thinking for me, or is it just helping me think? I think this is what we should be concerned about as teachers, as educators. Yeah. So, and something, so this is where, so what you're seeing on the screen right now is an example for what happens when AI works as your creative partner. Recently, there was this Commonwealth Prize, the story that won the Commonwealth Prize was accused of being AI generated. So there was that concern. So there are stories being written, and judges after judges, there are multiple levels, and judges after judges at different levels could not perceive it to be AI generated. So AI is becoming a good creative partner. The second picture that you see on the right, on the right side of the slide is someone who won the photography award, Sony World Photography Award, who then refused the prize saying it was AI generated. So AI is a very efficient creative partner as well. It's not like what I was saying, it's not just routine cognitive or monotonous tasks that are being done by AI. It's increasingly becoming powerful, more and more powerful. So when I would just like to, reiterate what I just said a few minutes ago, that we need to be aware of when is artificial intelligence thinking for us and when it is helping us to think. This requires serious consideration. And that, so I would like to talk about the second point here in this concern. For a long, long time, we imagined learning as something that happened primarily inside one person's mind. That's on the left-hand side that you see is learning happening with, when a single person, when one person interacts with content. In many of our classrooms, we believe this to be true. We believe that when my learner interacts with the lesson or the textbook, there is learning happening. So a student reads a book, listens to the teacher, memorized information, and demonstrated understanding through tests or exams and essays that they write. That is what learning was for us for quite some time. Today, we realize that that picture is not complete. The picture on the right-hand side, learning increasingly happens across people, books, search engines, digital resources, online communities, learning management systems, and now we have AI added into that mela. Yeah? So people are learning through a whole lot of different systems, not just through the book alone. And learning no longer resides in one person's cognition or brain. And this is not really surprising because take a look at the world outside. There is nobody who sits alone and does their work. Any sector, any domain that you look at, there are people working together. Scientists rarely work alone. Doctors consult their colleagues and databases and other decision support systems. Software engineers collaborate through shared repositories. Researchers work in international teams. Take a look at us as teachers. Teachers also work together in groups. So knowledge today is increasingly produced in networks rather than in isolation. Thinking no longer resides entirely within one individual learner. And this is what scientists call distributed cognition. So if this is how knowledge is created in the real world, perhaps learning should prepare students to not simply acquire knowledge individually, but participate intelligently in these knowledge networks. So when we bring in a digital activity or a group activity, we are kind of taking one step closer to helping our students understand how to work within a network, how to collaborate with others and generate knowledge. So the second challenge for education is therefore not simply to develop knowledgeable individuals, but to develop learners who can participate intelligently in complex knowledge ecologies. And this brings me to the third part of my talk. Here is another picture for distributed cognition, that a person interacts with other people, you see here, interacts with devices and other objects, interacts with stuff, and then you also have all these, digital networks and the cloud information stored in cloud and so on. So this is an example for distributed cognition. You will realize that this is how we learn. Yeah. So that's distributed cognition. I think it's taking some time for my slides to, okay. So we move to the third part of my talk, the third proposition, that AI is changing the nature of teaching. One of the biggest fears we face as teachers now is if AI can deliver content, can teach anything at the level my learners are at, in the style they want it at a time they want, not when we are ready as teachers, anytime the students want. And when AI can scaffold their learning with anything they require. So you support their learning with a video, a worksheet, or a podcast, or a material at a slightly lower level than what their textbooks are at. There is nothing that AI cannot do. It can also tirelessly explain something to students. As teachers, we find that if we explain a concept maybe 2 or 3 or 4 times, and then it really becomes tiring for us. Yeah, but AI can tirelessly work as a workhorse. It can keep explaining things. It can support our students 24 hours a day and still not be angry. It can support them throughout the day and not be angry with the students, nor will it make fun of them. There is a lot of research that talks about why students prefer AI. AI never judges. AI never makes fun of them. So that's one reason why they prefer AI. So if this much is what AI can do, what else is left for us as teachers to do? A second concern is what happens if we keep asking AI to do all the work for us. There are lots of terms that come up with it. Research on digital technologies show us that human beings routinely offload cognitive tasks onto tools. We use digital calendars to remember appointments. We use GPS systems to navigate. We use calculators to perform calculations and so on. Yeah. But what makes AI different is that it allows us to offload increasingly sophisticated cognitive activities, such as summarizing, planning, even decision making, drafting a report. Not just calculate. So it goes beyond the calendar and the calculator and the GPS system. Very important cognitive activities, which we thought were the sole responsibility of human brain, are what are now being given to AI. So there is a term for this. This is called cognitive outsourcing or cognitive offloading. Yeah. So this is something that most of us are doing, including our students. This creates both opportunities and risks. While offloading routine tasks can free our brains to focus on higher order thinking skills, over-reliance on machines for offloading can also reduce opportunities for reflection, leading to what researchers call cognitive debt. Yeah, we owe the machine. There is a debt that we owe the machine because the machine has helped us a lot. So cognitive, sorry, cognitive debt. And the second term that researchers use for this is metacognitive laziness. Give me a minute. So this is where I'm also drawing on what the Honorable Vice Chancellor was talking about in the morning. One of the consistent findings emerging from research is that AI appears to be most useful when it supplements rather than replaces human teaching. Students benefit from explanations, personalized practice, and on-demand feedback. At the same time, they continue to value discussion, encouragement, clarifications, and other social dimensions of learning that human teachers provide. The evidence increasingly suggests that the most productive educational environments are likely to be those that combine the strengths of both. That's what you see on the screen now. So if students can generate essays, reports, and reflections with AI support, then assessment can no longer rely solely on the evaluation of final products, right? We have this as a concern. We say, if ChatGPT is generating the essays, why should I even evaluate that essay? So increasingly, teachers are now moving towards exploring alternate means of assessment like portfolios. You see how change happens across their writing or across their products. We are also looking at process-based assessments. Yeah, what's the thinking process that went into creating this? We are increasingly bringing in oral defenses, project work, collaborative tasks, and reflective commentaries. There are also teachers like me. I ask my students to do this. I ask them to share the conversation that they had with an AI tool or ChatGPT. in order to create an essay that they came up with. So yes, go ahead and use ChatGPT, yes, but tell me how you used it and tell me what are changes that you suggested? What was your involvement in it? Recent work from OECD also suggests the same thing, that AI is most valuable when it supports collaborative inquiry, dialogic learning, dialogue, and knowledge construction. So used well, AI becomes another participant in the learning ecosystem in distributed cognition. So instead of asking, how do I explain this topic? Teachers need to increasingly ask, how do I help students think critically about this topic? How do I help them ask better questions? How do I help them evaluate competing explanations? Because when AI gives you competing explanations, it's the student who has to take a decision. How do I help them connect ideas across different sources of knowledge? And this requires different kind of literacy. That's what we're going to look at next. Earlier, when books came in and so on, we used to say someone who is literate is someone who can do the 3 R's. If you can read, write, and do a little bit of arithmetic, you are considered literacy. That was literacy now. Now we have to look at a different kind of literacy. Across the world, we see schools and colleges and universities are rushing to adopt AI tools. But perhaps we are doing the wrong thing first. This is not the first thing to do is not adopt tools. Before asking which AI platform to purchase or which chatbot to use, we should ask whether our students and teachers are AI literate. So it is AI literacy that there are lots of articles on the same thing where researchers say, develop AI literacy first before adopting AI tools. So if literacy in the 20th century was reading, writing, and arithmetic, AI literacy involves understanding how systems operate, how intelligent systems operate, where they are useful, where they are limited, how their outputs should be interpreted, and so on. I think the last part is the most important part, how their output should be interpreted. So AI literacy is much more than prompt engineering, much more than learning to write effective prompts. It's understanding how AI systems generate responses. We need to understand that it is not a person sitting there. So when we say ChatGPT feels or ChatGPT thinks or ChatGPT says, we are kind of trying to we're trying to make it a human being. What we need to understand is that it's just a machine that is stringing together words in the most identifiable pattern. That's it. So we need to understand how they generate responses. We need to recognize their limitations. We need to identify bias and hallucinations. Many times AI machines hallucinate. You ask it to talk about Kerala, I come from Kerala, it could talk about Bihar. Yeah, so sometimes there are hallucinations happening. So we need to be able to recognize hallucinations. We need to be able to understand bias because AI is strongly built on data that is available from what is typically called WAAR as an acronym. Data that AI has been fed into are predominantly from Western societies, from educated class, WEI, industrial, yes, and are rich and democratic. So it's largely this population that has fed the data is from this population that's come into AI. So we need to be able to recognize bias, evaluate the reliability of outputs, protecting privacy. These are all things that we should be teaching our teachers and students in order to be AI literate. UNESCO also has an AI literacy taxonomy or framework. It too considers AI literacy as a broader construct. It says it is beyond tools. It is not tool use, but it includes understanding AI, questioning AI, evaluating AI, understanding data, and recognizing bias. We were just talking about that, right? That we need to be able to ask questions like, who has access to AI? Who benefits from AI? whose language appears in AI. This is why I was talking about that limited data set primarily from the global north. Yeah? So whose language is there and whose knowledge comes in AI, whose values appear in AI. So it is AI literacy actually means critical understanding of AI and not tool proficiency. Knowing how to handle a Claude or a Gemini is not really AI literacy. It goes much beyond that. And this is also why, if you notice, many literacy missions fail because we think reading the word is what we need to teach our students. But what we need to understand is it's much more than reading the word. It has to be reading the world. We need to teach our students how to read the world. That is when they become AI literate. Yeah? And this shift requires us to rethink what we value in education. And that brings me to the last part of my talk. How should disciplines, and for us humanities, because I'm sure a majority of us are from humanities, how should disciplines like humanities and universities change? So I start with good news. I start with the news that we are not really, irrelevant. Universities and colleges and schools are not going to be scrapped. We're not going to become unimportant. We're still going to retain our significance. What we need to look at is what are some intellectual activities that define the university? What exactly do we do in our schools and colleges and universities? And what happens when AI performs some of them? So if all we are doing is transmitting information in our classes, we have already seen that AI is doing it. So if information transmission is all that we are doing in the name of teaching, then obviously we are redundant. We are already outdated. We are already, going out of the window. We need to understand that educational institutions like universities no longer have a monopoly on knowledge production. So the purpose of education cannot be simply information transmission. We can remain valuable if we cultivate inquiry, dialogue, interpretation, debate, critique, imagination, ethical reasoning, and build intellectual independence. Because now AI participates in many of the activities that universities traditionally taught. And it is in this context that we move to take a relook at humanities. Humanities, I feel, are becoming more and not less. We are becoming more important because AI raises questions about meaning, about language, about ethics, creativity, and human identity. Large language models like ChatGPT raise profoundly humanistic questions like what is meaning? What is language? What is creativity? What is authorship? Can machines think? What is thinking then? Yeah. What is interpretation? What is consciousness? These have always been the concern of humanities. Therefore, I feel AI makes humanities more and not less important. And artificial intelligence is no longer simply a computer science problem. Its implications extend into education, linguistics, literature, philosophy, psychology, law, sociology, public policy, ethics, and the arts. No single discipline can adequately understand the technology that shapes every discipline. So this is something that shapes every discipline, and it has to be done by a multidisciplinary setup. And what we have on the slide now is Steve Jobs, who did not talk about AI. He was talking about technology, and that the best technology is something that combines humanities and technology. So, so I would like us to also think about interdisciplinarity coming in. So Catherine Elkins, the first person I was talking about in the previous slide, also like Steve Jobs argues that conversation about AI should not be left solely to computer scientists, engineers, or technology companies. She asks a question. She asks, who, if not us, yeah, who, if not the humanists, should help shape AI ethics, AI policy, AI governance, AI design, public understanding, and so on. Otherwise, decisions about language, culture, meaning, and values will be made by people who do not study them. Catherine Elkins says that decisions about language, culture, meaning, and values in the time of AI should be made with the people who study them professionally. And these are humanists. Humanities scholars should shape AI, and we should not merely respond to it. We should not be just using ChatGPT and responding to it, but we should be actually taking the initiative to change it. The third point I would like to make with regard to the last proposition is that AI puts us in this danger of encouraging us to value aspects of learning that can be measured, quantified, or automated. There is only some part of learning that can be quantified, right? Because education always had broader purposes. Education is concerned not just with academic achievement, 80%, 90%, 100%. That's not just what education is about. We are also concerned with human development, citizenship, dignity, creativity, social responsibility, and many of these outcomes that we value in education, like creativity, ethical reasoning, empathy, collaboration, civic responsibility, are all difficult to measure and impossible to reduce to simple metrics. So the challenge for universities is to not merely adopt AI, but to ensure that technological innovation remains aligned with broader educational goals. And what you're reading is Farida Shahid, the Special Rapporteur on Right to Education in the United Nations Human Research Council, who is calling for a move to human rights-based pedagogy. So this is something that we should be looking at too. So these recommendations highlight the fact that teachers should do what AI cannot. See, there are some things that AI can do. There are some things AI cannot do. What AI cannot do is where teachers should come in. And then there are some things that teachers cannot do, which is where AI should be brought in. Because artificial intelligence can recommend, but it cannot care. It can personalize instruction. Yes, it can really give you good individualized, personalized instruction, but it does not know the aspirations, fears, languages, cultures, or lived realities of the students who are sitting before us. Only teachers know that. And this is especially important for us in India in multilingual classrooms. And before I wind up, I would also like us to take a look at what India has in response to AI. As someone who works in multilingual educational context, I have always found that students in my classes who come from different parts of the country, different parts of the world, there are almost 60, 61 countries that send students to our university. We also have students from almost all the states in the country. Now, I find one aspect of AI particularly interesting, and I'm grateful for that, because for years, many learners have struggled because educational systems often expected them to think and read and write through a single language. Most of the time, English. Yeah. Today, AI-powered translation and multilingual tools support learners to move flexibly across languages. I have seen students use AI to clarify concepts in one language, their home language, discuss them in another, and then produce academic work in English. This is something that AI has been able to do. This reminds us that technology can sometimes extend participation rather than merely automate tasks. And what you're looking at on the screen on the left side are a little bit of details about Sarvam AI, which kind of works as ChatGPT, and Bhashini, which gives you speech to text, text to speech, translation across Indian languages, both done by AI for Bharat. Very useful tools. And in conclusion, I would like to leave you all with the way forward. I mean, a suggestion that I am making for our way forward. A colleague recently asked me whether students will still write essays in the age of AI. I think that's the wrong question. Yeah? Students will certainly continue to write. The more important question we need to ask is, why are we asking them to write essays? If writing is simply a way of producing text, then AI can already do that. But if writing is a way of thinking, exploring ideas, developing a position, and discovering one's own voice, then writing remains as important as ever. The purpose changes, the value remains. And this is why I would like to end with something practical, what I call the human AI human framework. I feel that every meaningful learning should start with the human learner. It should not begin with technology. It should begin with the human, with curiosity, with questions, with connection to what we already know, with connection to our lived experience, our culture, with our language, with the problems that we are trying to solve. And only then we should invite AI into the learning process. So it doesn't work as a replacement for thinking, it works as a partner for thinking. So AI will then explain difficult ideas, suggest alternative perspectives, generate examples, translate across languages, provide feedback, challenge your assumptions, expand participation by supporting creativity, accelerating inquiry. And then the learning journey should end where it began, back to the human learner. So the human learner then comes back to the learning part to reflect what AI has given you, to question what AI has given us, to evaluate, to discuss, to create, to make ethical decisions. And so the final stage is human judgment, and these are values that we need to be interested in. So these are some capabilities that we need to be instilling in our students in order to make them AI ready. Yeah. So when it's an AI first policy, these are capabilities, human capabilities that are required in an AI society. So I would like to then end by saying that the question is no longer whether AI should be introduced into education, because that's a no-brainer. We have to anyway introduce AI into education. The question is how education should evolve. How should education respond to it so that human values remain at the center of increasingly AI-mediated societies? And that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am, for an absolutely enlightening session that truly highlighted the interdisciplinary core of our theme. Besides, you have successfully cured us from all the negativities centered around AI, especially the good news that we teachers are not going to be scrapped. We are incredibly fortunate to have your expertise guiding us today. Thank you once again.